guest away today is Dr. Angela Voss, Senior Lecturer at Canterbury Christ Church University. You've run a number of different programs, MA programs over the years.
2 MA programs I've run, and I've also contributed to the Exeter one.
Thank you very much for joining us to talk about your Esoteric Island discs. Maybe the first thing I'd like to ask you is, how did you get into Western esotericism?
Well, I think it grew gradually, but a major turning point for me was when I was at university, and I did a year of classical studies, and we were studying Plato's Republic and read The Allegory of the Cave. And I'd never read any Plato before. I had been a musician, and I knew that music moved me very deeply to a sort of altered state of consciousness, I guess. I didn't really have any theory to understand why Renaissance music was so important and so powerful for me. I never read any philosophy until then. And then we did this year on Plato, and reading Plato's Myth of the Cave was like one of those aha moments, which it was intended to be, of course, by Plato. It was intended to be an initiatory story. And it was just like opening a door. And I realized that music for me had been like the way out of the cave. It had been like a way of moving away from the kind of shadows of everyday life, as it were, and opening up this magic door. And that story meant so much to me that I felt I must just start studying more of this material, and started reading more Plato. And of course that just led me to the Pythagorean tradition. It led me to the Hermetic tradition. And then when I was in my 20s, I was a member of the School of Economic Science, which is actually a philosophical school devoted to the teachings of Plato, Plotinus, Ficino, as well as Eastern teachings.
Advaita Vedanta as well, no?
Yes,
Vedanta,
yes, that's right. That's right. Yes, so combined East and West. I came into contact with, I worked for Anthony Rooley, who ran the Concert of Music, who was deeply into the philosophy of Renaissance music and introduced me to the letters of Marsilio Ficino, who completely grabbed me and basically told me that I needed to write about his astrological music therapy, because no scholar had yet done so and justified what he was doing. And that's how it all grew, really. And that led me in deeply into the Western esoteric tradition in terms of reading his sources, the Hermetica, Plotinus, Iamblichus. And that's how it all started.
So Plato, as so often, was the gateway drug.
Yeah.
It's as he has been for millennia now, for people to start looking into a hard to define, but nevertheless you know it when you see it, sort of subterranean tradition in the West. Sometimes it's subterranean, sometimes it pokes its head above the parapet and becomes quite open, and then it has to go hide again.
Yes.
Now, you first studied music performance, Renaissance and Baroque music, is that right? And then later did your PhD on the astrological music therapy of Ficino.
Yes, so I started learning violin and piano at quite an early age. And then when I was a teenager, I discovered Renaissance music through the television series The Six Wives of Henry VIII, which actually had original music with it. And I'd never heard anything from that period before, and it just really hit a chord with me. And I thought, wow, there's something, and there's a memory stirred by this period of music. And that led me to start exploring that whole period of music. This was in the 70s, when early music was just at its beginnings, really, of being revived on original instruments. And it led me to discover the music of Monteverdi, who, became, still is, my greatest love, really, in terms of composers. And I would just sit for hours and hours with headphones on when I was a teenager, listening to Monteverdi and Gabrielli and Dowland, and all my friends were all at discos. And that's how I got into that period of music. And then when I was at university, the opportunity came to start learning to play the lute and the viol and the Baroque violin. And I went on to study Baroque violin and viol at the Guildhall School of Music after university for a year. And fully intended to have a kind of career, really, in early music.
Now, your first disc, tell us about this, Bach's Double Violin Concerto.
So my first disc is really going right back to when I was at school. And I just wanted to start with a piece of music that is so nostalgic because I used to play this Bach double violin concerto with a friend of mine at school when we were both learning the violin. And I just absolutely love it. And it's this particular performance that I've chosen is just so stunning. It's so full of life. It's so vital. It's so just uplifting. And I came across it and I just couldn't stop listening to it. And it took me straight back to playing this piece, with my friend at school, and it really being the sort of start of this feeling that I wanted to play music all my life.
So the first movement of Johann Sebastian Bach Double Violin Concerto by the Netherlands Bach Society with Shunsuke Sato and Emily Deans. So you went on to do your PhD in the astrological music therapy of Marsilio Ficino. I wonder if you can tell us about discovering Ficino and what you learned about him in your research.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I discovered Ficino, as I mentioned, partly through the School of Economic Science and partly through Anthony Rooley and the fact that he'd been reading about Renaissance thought and philosophy. And I started reading Ficino's letters and I thought, wow, this is absolutely incredible man who was in the 15th century, writing about universal themes that are so important for us now in such an accessible way. And I began to realize through reading his letters just how immersed in astrology he was, because there are so many letters addressed to, his fellow statesmen, churchmen, philosophers, musicians, the Medici family, particularly Lorenzo de' Medici, just talking in a very everyday way about their horoscopes, and saying something like, "Oh, I won't send this letter to you today because Saturn's in a bad position and it probably will be delayed," or just these everyday comments about astrology. I thought this is absolutely fascinating. And then I discovered his 3 books on life, and the third part of which is called How to Fit Your Life to the Heavens, is all about using astrology in a therapeutic way, in a magical way, to create rituals to all the different planetary deities, or daimons, actually, in order to harmonize one's soul with the cosmos, and using someone's horoscope as a starting point, in order to work with them, and playing the right kind of music, using the right kind of incenses, the right kinds of foods, herbs, colors. And this is all part of the natural magic process. I thought, wow, this is so modern, this is really new age in a way, and it's fantastic. And I began investigating scholarly writings about Ficino and found that hardly anybody had taken this seriously. Hardly any scholars, this was in the 80s, trusted Ficino's work on astrology. For them, it was almost embarrassing that such an eminent philosopher could practice astrology. And not only that, that he could write a whole treatise called Disputation Against the Judgments of Astrologers, and then write letters to his friends all about astrology. And this was totally confusing to them. And I could understand perfectly why he was doing this. And it was almost like he literally grabbed me, shook me by the shoulders and said, look, you've got to write about why astrology and music was so important, not just important to my Platonism, but fundamental to the Platonic worldview. And I just felt I had to do it. It was just like a sort of call from the past, or call from some daimonic destiny or thread or something, that I was chosen to do in some strange way. So that's when I embarked on, well, first of all, I did an MA in music performance and wrote a dissertation about his music, and then went on to do the PhD, which is a more sort of full study of his astrological music and how he went about it, and his influences as well, his Hermetic and Neoplatonic influences. Yeah, and it was a difficult task, because they were a entirely male community within the 15th century elite sort of circle of Florence. There isn't a single woman mentioned in Ficino's entire letters, apart from one letter where he mentions his mother and his grandmother as being clairvoyants, interestingly enough. But all the letters are addressed to men. And I was immersed in this world for 5 or 6 years, and felt that I was having to become like an honorary member of this Platonic Academy, which meant, it was very difficult to maintain a kind of feminine identity. As you probably know, when you're writing a PhD, you just get completely immersed in that subject, and you live it and you breathe it. So I had quite a love-hate relationship with it in some ways, because I had to preserve myself as a woman and a female voice within this entirely male milieu. Yeah, and that was probably the most challenging thing.
I would imagine that Ficino's oeuvre is especially male dominant, not just because of the era he lived in, when men were movers and shakers and women were largely not on the political stage, on the public stage, but also because Ficino wasn't particularly interested in women. He's not about to have a Beatrice figure or something like that, because he just doesn't fancy women.
He's not interested, no. I mean, he obviously had very sort of sublimated homoerotic relationships with fellow men like Giovanni Cavalcanti, who he dedicated his commentary on Plato's Symposium to.
Spicy.
But he says, Venus is Diana to me. He doesn't have any particular attraction to women at all. No, it was a very, very male. And yet his wisdom is so universal and applies to absolutely everybody. It was almost like he transcended any kind of gender in the way he writes. But his whole circle was male. Yeah, it was imitating the Platonic Academy of Athens.
And to be fair, Plato, whose interlocutors and so on are also very male, and insofar as sex comes up, it's this kind of pederastic milieu where you have older men and younger boys. So it's boys and men. But that being said, Plato maybe goes further than any ancient writer to question, first of all, whether it even makes sense to have men dominant in society, which he does in the Republic in a very explicit way.
Absolutely.
And also in the Symposium, he plays with gender to such a degree that you are kind of left going like, what is a man? What is a woman? You have this Diotima showing up suddenly out of the blue.
Absolutely. Diotima's,
and talking
very
about men
character.
becoming pregnant and all this sort of thing.
Yes, I think with Plato, you just have to accept that, the norms of his society and there's a whole social aspect to the way he wrote and the kind of people he wrote for and with. Ficino's very different in that he does totally recognize, heterosexual marriage as honorable and divine. And, there's a completely different feel about the Renaissance attitude towards love. But yes, it was still, I think, for me, the sort of male philosophical circle that I was entering into still meant that there was a whole sort of physical feminine side that wasn't being honored, because it was very much about restoring Sophia, about restoring the divine feminine, and about how love, human love is about moving from the human being to the divine, and the human being is the human being is the embodiment of the divine, but it's, you know, not the end point. You know, you're moving further, you're moving upwards, as it were, through love, which leaves the sort of the whole area of the sort of the erotic feminine a bit ambiguous. And yeah, it was quite a challenge for me at that time.
Okay.
I think I've formed a better relationship with it now, and can understand the whole sort of ethos of the period and what Ficino was trying to talk about in terms of bringing the two worlds together. That actually it's not a split; it's a uniting of the earthly and the divine ultimately.
Tell us about your second piece of music.
Yes, so my second piece of music really is representing my love of Renaissance polyphony. So at the same time that I was listening to a lot of John Dowland and Monteverdi and 16th, 17th century music, I just fell completely in love with English polyphonic music. And this was one of the pieces, again, I just used to listen to for hours. And it is so extraordinary because it's in 40 parts. So the effect of the harmonies as Tallis kind of combines many voices with a few voices and sort of interweaves, you know, the different parts is absolutely intoxicating. And this period of music, polyphonic music in particular, really focused on the harmonic movement. You know, it wasn't so concerned with, as later music came to be, with the power of the text dominating the music, as we would find perhaps in the early 17th century with Monteverdi and with solo songs. You know, polyphony is more about moving with the harmonies in a way that recreates the perfect harmonies of the fourth and the fifth and the octave within the Pythagorean tradition. So, you know, you're continually sort of led to rest at the perfect intervals of the fifth and the fourth. And the words obviously are important because they are, you know, there underlying the music, but they're not what really dominate. And the version that I've chosen is particularly poignant because it was made quite recently in a huge space of the Tate Modern in London by the Aura Singers when they were all socially distanced. So there's 40 singers arranged sort of 6 feet apart from each other in this huge space.
Yeah.
And I think it says something about the tragedy that's happened to the arts during the COVID lockdown period and how, you know, artists really need to reclaim their space, and how the power of this music, you know, resounding in this wonderful art gallery as well, about restoring, you know, the harmony that we've lost during all the sort of fear and panic and restrictions of this period. So I think it's like doubly powerful.
Thomas Tallis, Spem in Alium by the Aura Singers, conducted by Susie Digby. Your next piece is a modern development of a theme by Thomas Tallis by Vaughan Williams. So what brings you to this, selecting this piece of music?
Well, again, this is rather nostalgic in that it goes back to my childhood and was one of the very first pieces of classical music that I heard. And I have to say that I very rarely, in fact, listen to music post 1700. I know that's a bit of a musical hermit in that sense, but there are, certain pieces from 20th century that really do move me, and this is one of them. And there's something about Vaughan Williams' music, all of it really, that touches something very sort of mysterious and ineffable about Englishness. There's something about Vaughan Williams' music that immediately conjures up ruined castles and rolling hills, and it sort of takes me into a sort of space of a sort of lost, imaginal English land. And the way that he's created and sort of weaved an orchestral piece around a very simple theme of Tallis is quite extraordinary. It's like he's sort of symphonized it. He's just taken a very simple and very religious, very spiritual snippet almost of Tallis, and then woven this massive orchestral sounds around it. Again, with great variety, sometimes just using a few strings, sometimes like the whole orchestra. And there's just a point in the middle when it just kind of wells up to this great kind of outpouring of engagement with something beyond. That's all like the way I can put it. So, yes, it's just one of those pieces that transports me and connects both with my love of Renaissance music and English polyphony, and also with this feeling of being rooted in England and in an England that we've lost, and a kind of Englishness that we've lost, and a countryside that was somehow connected to itself, less to technology, perhaps.
It's interesting because Vaughan Williams is, of course, writing music in the era of the steam trainifization of the English countryside and the modern march of progress.
That's right, and maybe it's a reaction to that.
The way you express it, it's very clear that you have a deep kind of emotional connection to this imaginal landscape, this, say, Blakean eternal England that.
Yes, I think I do.
But at the same time, there's transcendence there too, because you talk about he's connecting to something beyond, in an absolute sense, not beyond this or beyond that, just simply beyond. The two can coexist so closely, right? You have that feeling of truly being at home, right, in a way that maybe you're not even truly at home in today's England.
Yeah.
But also transcending any idea of place altogether.
Yes, and I think that reminds me also that it's something about bringing together the transcendent and nature. I'm just thinking of the Lark Ascending, for example, and his Fantasia on English folk tunes. There's something about having this imaginal vision, but it's still grounded in nature. It's in birds. It's in folk customs. It's in history. There's something connective about his music, and I guess that's partly why I love it.
Ralph Vaughan Williams' Fantasia on a Theme by Thomas Tallis, section from this middle of the piece, played by the Toronto Symphony Orchestra. And now we come to Claudio Monteverdi. Before we play your piece, because it's so clear that Monteverdi is a great love of yours, perhaps you can tell us what it is about his music generally that is so moving to you.
Well, yes. Okay.
Who was he, first of all?
Well, who was he? Yes, who was he? So he was a Italian composer who died in 1643, I believe, in Venice. And he, first of all, worked in Mantua for the Duke there, and then he moved to Venice. So his careers were in Mantua and Venice. He composed 8 books of madrigals, so he was the last great madrigal composer, really, and his 8 books of madrigals span a long period of time, and the first ones tend to be fairly conventional in terms of madrigal writing, and the last ones are completely original and exploring whole new ways of writing for voices in such a way that the madrigal could go no further, really, after his eighth book of madrigals. And he also wrote 4 operas. He was the first operatic composer. His first opera, Orfeo, in 1607, set the scene, really, for the future operatic style. And he devised what he called the new music, which was a kind of singing that we would now call more sort of recitative or sort of monodic kind of singing with a continuo accompaniment, which was a whole new kind of music, really, derived from the Florentine Camerata, who were a group of musicians and theorists at the end of the 16th century who wanted to get back to a more pure kind of singing where the emotions of the words were primary and that the music backed up the emotions of the words. And so for Monteverdi, he aimed all his life for what he called the perfect marriage of words and music. The meaning of the words was perfectly supported by the musical composition and the phrases he chose and how he actually created the musicality under the words. And I think there's nobody else who achieves that perfection as well as he does. I mean, it's quite extraordinary. And I think what moves me most about his music is the fact that, I suppose if we're talking kind of esoterically, he lifts the personal to the universal. So in his madrigals about love, for example, one is moved not just by a sense of human love, but one's moved to a sense of divine love. So the erotic and the spiritual come together. And some of his music is so erotic, it has one sort of swooning, but it's not, it's swooning for a kind of longing for something beyond the human, but it's also deeply erotic. And I think that's what I found the most powerful, particularly as a teenager, about his music. It was just, wow, this kind of, it set off a longing for me, for some kind of divine love that was impossible to find on a sort of human plane almost. Astrologically, if any listeners are astrologers or have any understanding of astrological symbolism, he does have in his horoscope a conjunction of the planets of Venus and Mercury, which represent words and music. Venus is music, Mercury is words. I've written quite a lot and thought a lot about the symbolism of his horoscope in relation to his music, which is absolutely fascinating. But that particular conjunction, that Mercury and Venus, he just lived, and he just acted, he just composed. It was innate in him, to find this perfect relationship of the words and music. For me, the greatest piece he wrote was the Vespers of 1610, which he wrote in Mantua as a kind of audition piece for the job of Maestro di Cappella at St. Mark's in Venice. And he pulls out all the stops in this piece. It's a setting of the Vespers, but it's full of such variety, virtuosic solo sections, duets, choral settings of psalms. He introduces kind of vocal techniques that are quite extraordinary and quite sort of Eastern in many ways, displaying this sort of, it's almost like the singer is like a magical incantatory vehicle for something that's coming from beyond them. It's full of sort of like Counter-Reformation sort of piety as well. It's devoted to the Virgin Mary, and there's this sense of deep spirituality about it. It's also very poignant in that he wrote it quite soon after the deaths of both his wife and his musical protege, Caterina Martinelli, who lived with them. So he was undergoing a period of deep grief himself. And he comes up with this incredible piece dedicated to the Virgin Mary, almost like a sort of redemption piece in a way. Yes, I wanted to include a piece from the Vespers, Duo Seraphim, which is a text taken from two different parts of the Bible, but it's particularly magical. It's probably one of the most magical pieces within the Vespers, in that it has two singers representing the two seraphim who are calling to one another. They're usually set in opposite ends of the church or in different places. And then a third which joins them. So Monteverdi creates this very magical effect when he has the two voices, and then he has the third joining. And when he sets the words, these are three in one, the harmony sort of comes into a complete unison and almost stands still. And it's like the listener kind of can viscerally feel the sense of three becoming one. It really is amazingly physical, that sort of sensation. And I have a sort of story from Mark Tucker, who's a singer friend who was involved in a project with me, which we'll come to, who said he was once singing this piece in a church, and as they were singing, the back doors of the church just sort of flung open, and it just felt like something was sort of rushing in. And it is very incantatory, particularly on the word sanctus, sanctus, where the singers just go on and on and on with repeating this with a very sort of elaborate vocal technique, repeating the word holy, holy, holy. It's a totally magical invocation.
Well, let's have a listen. There we go. The Monteverdi Choir at St. Mark's performing Duo Seraphim from Claudio Monteverdi's Vespers in 1990. This sounds like, to me, as a non-specialist, that Monteverdi was a kind of... He was like a Stockhausen of his day. He was pushing the materials, the technical abilities of his performers, but also the forms to new places. A bit like we see with the later Bach, when he's going crazy on the keyboard and just creating almost atonal type compositions. But the operatic form was, in some senses, conceived of as a move back to the past, right? Bridging the gap over the so-called Middle Ages, which was an idea that was just being invented at the time, actually, back to ancient Greek drama.
Yes. Yes, that's kind of rather paradox, really, that the Camerata and Monteverdi, with their new music, felt that they were going straight back to ancient Greek powers of moving the soul through the ethos, through emotional ethos. And they rather, not Monteverdi, but some of the other Camerata rather disdained what they called the first practice, which was polyphony, where you couldn't really hear the meaning of the words because the harmony was the most important. And they felt that wasn't going to move the soul as much as this new music, where the ethos of the words, as in what Plato talked about in the Republic, that the words were the most important aspect. And I've discussed this a lot with students. And what actually does move the soul more? Is it polyphony, or is it the solo song? And of course, the solo song then began to develop into opera and became a lot more emotional, a lot more personal. I think after the mid-17th century really loses a connection with a kind of magical universe, really. I think Monteverdi's later operas aren't so successful in that sense. But I think Orfeo and Arianna, what we have left of Arianna, her lament, do both still connect us back into a sort of more participatory universe. And I think this is another reason why Monteverdi is so powerful, because yes, he is using a new form of music. He is using monody, he is using recitative, and he is totally believing that what he's doing is emulating Plato's ideals of the listener feeling the emotion that the singer's feeling, that there's this sort of sympathetic reaction going on. But it's not self-indulgent and personal, and it's not like, Verdi, or it's not that sort of highly sentimentalized sense. He still manages to do that, but still lift the listener to a kind of higher point. I'm just thinking of Orfeo's magical incantation to Charon in Orfeo, where he's singing a song to him to enchant him, to allow him to take him across the river Styx to rescue Eurydice. And Monteverdi uses all sorts of musical interludes and different kinds of instruments. And the very final verse is a very simple setting with strings, which is very ambiguous. And he's saying, "Sol tu, noble Dio, only you, noble God, can kind of help me." And it's usually interpreted that he's referring to Charon here, but Charon isn't a god. He's just like a sort of daimonic presence. So Sol also refers to Apollo and the sun. And it's almost that Monteverdi is quite deliberately using a little hymn to the sun at this point, harping straight back to Ficino's Orphic singing.
And harking indeed back to the idea of the subterranean sun in the Orphic gold tablets and things like this.
Yes, and the harmony that he creates very much reminiscent of a lira da braccio, which is probably the instrument that Ficino would have used.
So that's a kind of cello-like instrument?
It's more like a violin sort of shaped instrument, but it plays chordally. It's a flat bridge, so it sort of plays pure harmonics of chords underneath. And I think it was the instrument that Ficino probably played. It evokes very strong harmonics, a lira da braccio. So Monteverdi sort of imitates this instrument and has Orfeo really sing a hymn to the Apollo at this point in order to help him on his quest to the underworld. And that has such deep esoteric connotations that you can't really sort of go into now. But I can't imagine that this wasn't based on what Monteverdi knew of what Ficino was doing. I mean, or what was maybe quite a few kind of magical magus type musicians were doing during the 16th century. So it still retains that sort of magical sense.
Well, speaking of Orpheus, tell us about your next piece of music.
So this is an Orphic hymn to Jupiter from a CD called Secrets of the Heavens that I was very fortunate to mastermind back in 2000 with a group of musicians and with the actor Mark Rylance, who was reading Ficino's words. And we recreated imaginatively sort of semi-improvised versions of the Orphic hymns that Ficino would have sung to the different deities. So we don't have his original translations, but these were hymns that were written in Greek in the early centuries CE, believed to be much earlier, believed to be written by Orpheus himself back at the time of sort of Pythagoras, Hermes Trismegistus. And for Ficino and his circle, these hymns were vitally important as kind of talismanic, theurgic, intermediary symbols, really. They were hymns to the different deities and elements, but he would have regarded them as like intermediary vehicles to lift the soul up to God. Each deity was like an aspect of the divine. So by singing a hymn to Venus, you would be devoting yourself to the deity of Venus, who would be then leading you to the divine itself. So for him, these hymns were an indication of how polytheistic and monotheistic worldviews could live together and be harmonized. And I've always been fascinated by these hymns, and the opportunity arose and the funding arose to create a CD where because we don't know exactly what Ficino did. We have none of his music has actually survived. So the singers, Mark Tucker and Catherine King, kind of composed their own music, their own hymns to the deities. And we interspersed these with Renaissance music of the period, which conformed to Ficino's description of the different kinds of music for Mars and Mercury and the Moon, Venus, and produced a CD with readings as well in between. And then we performed it live in Church of St Bartholomew the Great in London, which was probably one of the high points of my life, this live performance, because there we were at the high altar of the church performing pagan hymns, and we had the appropriate incenses being wafted by an incense expert along the aisle as we sang them. And it was like really the culmination of all the work I'd done on Ficino, and it was something that had grown out of my PhD thesis, I guess, but it was like, it was a theurgic ritual in itself. So I'd just like to play one of the hymns, which is the hymn to Jupiter that was composed by and sung by Mark Tucker, with an introduction by Mark Rylance.
The soul of the whole universe is called Jove, who inwardly nourishes heaven and earth, the moving seas, the moon's shining orb, the stars and sun. Permeating every limb, he moves the whole mass and mingles with its vast substance. It is thus that the heavenly spheres are set in motion and governed by Jove, the spirit and mind of the whole universe. From him also arise the musical songs of these spheres, which are called the Muses. The divine prophet Orpheus says, Jove is first, Jove is last, Jove is the head, Jove is the center. The universe is born of Jove. Jove is the foundation of the earth and of the star-bearing heaven. Jove appears as man, yet he is the spotless bride. Jove is the breath and form of all things. Jove is the source of the ocean. Jove is the movement of the undying fire. Jove is the sun and moon. Jove, the king and prince of all. We may understand from this that all bodies are full of Jove. He contains and nourishes them, so that truly it is said that whatever you see and wherever you move is Jove. The music of Jupiter is deep, earnest, and sweet, joyful, yet steady.
Corruptibilis, actibilos testimonium, redimus liberatorium et vadum.
So we've been fumigated by Storax now. When that performance took place, which sounds like a real happening, were people's minds completely blown? Did you create?
Yes, people in the audience said they were very, very deeply moved by the whole experience. And I think it was interesting that it took place just before my academic career started. And I always regard it as a kind of blessing, really, of the gods for all the projects, the academic projects that followed, the MA programs that I devised.
Tell us about the MA programs, because this is some very interesting stuff.
At about 1998 or so, I began teaching at the University of Kent on a wonderful MA program called the Study of Mysticism and Religious Experience, run by Leon Schlamm, who's no longer with us, and Peter Moore. And they just invited me to teach a module on Ficino for that program. I'd never done any teaching before. I was plunged into MA level teaching and learnt sort of by leaping in the deep end. And my colleague, Geoffrey Cornelius, who I've been working with for over 20 years now, who is also an astrologer and an academic and has done an amazing study of divinatory practice and hermeneutics, was also teaching with me on that program. And after a few years, an amazing thing happened, which was that a huge sum of money fell into our laps from a trust that wanted to support astrology in higher education. And to cut a long story short, we developed an MA program at the University of Kent called MA in the Cultural Study of Cosmology and Divination, which was amazing. And I became a full-time member of staff there, and Geoffrey and Patrick Curry and lots of other people were involved. And we taught all these things. We taught esoteric philosophy, history of divination and astrology, but it was very much experiential as well. So students wrote learning journals. It was very much about, at the time, we didn't call it. Only more recently have we come to understand it as a transformative learning program, which it has been more recently. But at that time, we still understood it as a place where students could engage with their own spiritual paths as well as academic study. That was vitally important. That ended in 2011 because there was strong opposition from certain parts of the university who ideologically were very opposed to what we were doing. And then after another 3 years of preparation, we managed to start running it again in a slightly different format at Canterbury Christ Church University, where it has been running since 2014, in the education faculty. Formerly it was in religious studies, where it wasn't really happy. In the education faculty, we've been much luckier because they have been very open to all sorts of creative methods. So we've been able to have students creating artworks, and they have to do a creative project as well as a learning journal, as well as academic essays. So we've tried to really engage the imagination and use autobiographical methods, autoethnographic methods, intuitive methods. They can write very, very personal accounts of their own journeys, their own lives. And we've had over 100 students altogether, and some extraordinary dissertations and projects have come out of that program, and it has been truly transformative. Yes, sadly, that is coming to an end next year again, because for bureaucratic reasons, it doesn't fit into the university's agenda of education MAs, but it has achieved a huge amount. And I feel that with those 2 MA programs, I have fulfilled a personal destiny. I just put it like that. I've fulfilled something that I feel I was sent here to do, which was to bridge 2 worlds. The world of the practicing esoteric, if you like, as an astrologer, and knowledge through practice, knowledge through spiritual practice of all the students as well, and rigorous scholarly academic work on the texts and traditions. And that's what I've tried to do in my writing as well for the past 20, 30 years. I've tried to just inhabit that kind of middle place of the imaginal, what Henry Corbin would call the imaginal, and what Jeff Kripal, who's one of my favourite authors now as well, would say is the place where you can be both scholarly and critical and deeply spiritual and passionate. And that's where I've tried to locate myself. And that's where our teaching has come from, in terms of the MA, and the students have absolutely loved it. Yeah, that's what the MA programs have achieved. And we're now carrying on with a new online platform called the Centre for Myth, Cosmology and the Sacred.com, where we're offering online courses, webinars, seminars, as well as creating an archive of a lot of the MA work that people can read and see, the kind of wonderful things that were produced.
That's exciting, but it is very disheartening to hear that these approaches taken in traditional academic context have, either been pushed out or have been underfunded, or in one way or another have not had the kind of staying power that one would wish.
Yeah.
This, I think, is probably part of a general malaise in the study of the humanities.
Definitely. It's just a sign of the times. I think it's that all universities are absolutely panicking in terms of finances, in terms of student numbers, becoming more and more conservative in what they feel they have to offer. I think it's far more that than ideological. At Christ Church, anyway, it was very interesting. We had a very, very good relationship with the Church of England side of Christ Church, because they're a Church of England foundation. And we never had any ideological kind of opposition from the education faculty either. I think it's purely political and strategic, the reasons for ending the programme. Yeah, it's true that I don't think the powers that be understood the importance of the kind of transformative learning we were doing. I'm certain of that. But also, I think there's a deeper reason. I think that there comes a point where these studies have to move on to a different level. And there's a point at which the limitations and boundaries and constrictions of the academic world have to be outgrown and moved away from. And I think I was spending far too much time on form filling, where I think the universe was telling me actually that time needs to be spent on creating something deeper,
Right.
creating a kind of mystery school in a way that can take students deeper now into
Right.
something. So I kind of feel it's the right time as well to be moving on to something new.
So you can get away from filling in forms and get back to Plato's forms.
Get back to Plato's forms, yes, to try and get back to the real thing, although the virtual real thing at the moment.
It's a funny one, the virtual, because when I was reading, sorry if this is an unwelcome digression, but one of the things that really interests me about the divided line passage in the Republic is that at the bottom of the scale of knowledge, Plato puts knowledge of images, right? And so if everything in this world, the sensory world of becoming, is an image in some way of a higher world, of the world of forms,
Yeah.
all our knowledge through the senses is already knowledge of images, but this is an even more mediated form of knowledge, where you're things like paintings and creations of artifice. And I always thought, well, I don't know. I mean, I don't really get why Plato thinks that's such a significant further step away from true knowledge. In the internet era, it suddenly becomes clear what he was on about. Like, you think almost like this guy's a prophet,
Yeah.
because he gets that when you are mediating your way of being in the world through a simulation made by people, you're really not getting at reality.
Absolutely. And also, I think it's because people they say, oh yes, Plato, hated images. He hated the imagination. He just thought it was all fantasy. But I think what people don't realize is that Plato didn't. I mean, if you look at Ion and where he's talking about the poet and when he's talking about the inspired artist, he's just making a clear distinction between the artist or the poet who has gone out of the cave, and is actually seeing the truth and is bringing that back through their work, and the artist who is just looking at the back of the shadows and just recreating them. And he doesn't call it imagination. His language is still the intuitive intellect. It's the intellect which sees the forms. He's very clear that there are two kinds of artistic creation, and one will lift us out and one will just keep us stuck.
All right. So let's hope that this little creation we're creating now is one that lifts us out despite the
Oh, yes. Yes.
the internet-mediated form which it takes. Tell us about your next piece of music. This is John Dowland, and actually John Dowland is the one who inspired this idea of doing Esoteric Island
That's
Discs.
right. Well, yes, John Dowland, another amazing Renaissance composer, deeply inspired by Hermeticism, I believe. I mean, a lot of music historians would say there's no evidence to suggest, but for me, his music speaks volumes about the Hermetic associations. And he would have been, involved with the circle around John Dee and the poets who called themselves the School of the Night, who were deeply into Hermetic ideas of the soul being in its melancholy state, kind of trapped in the body and in despair, and needing to rise up through the cosmos in order to achieve, enlightenment. So there's a lot of cosmology in English Renaissance poetry, and there's a lot, a sense of desperation, really, of being unenlightened or sort of stuck in the night, in the darkness, but also the power of that darkness to instill the kind of longing to return, which is needed before you can return. So I think John Dowland is part of that movement. His little sort of motto by which he described himself was "Semper Dowland, semper dolens," always Dowland, always miserable or kind of depressed or whatever. But it's more than that. He took on that motto, as a kind of Hermetic maxim, I think. And his most famous pieces are based on the lacrimae theme, which means tears. And it's a little theme, sort of dum, da, da, dum, which is almost like a sort of tear overflowing, which he used for a lute solo and for a song called Flow My Tears. And his songs of melancholy are about a sort of world-weary existential angst, about the soul having fallen from its state of original divinity and longing to, well, the very power and beauty of the music, instills the longing to return. So I think it's deeply Hermetic in that sense. And his 7 lacrimae pavans, which are written for 5 viols and lute, for me, again, is another piece a bit like Monteverdi's Vespers. You sit and listen to these 7 pieces of music in the dark, maybe with a candle, and immerse yourself in them. And they are 7 stages from the earth to the divine. They are 7 forms of tears which start off as a kind of very ancient, almost primordial sense of having fallen from the divine, and then gradually the realization of the melancholy of the human condition through groaning and being sad, and then a kind of effort that's needed to make a turnaround and start moving upwards, as it were, through love, and then the final true tears where one sort of reaches one's destination. So these 7 pavans, again, a lot of music historians will poo-poo this idea, but I understand them as reflecting the Hermetic fall and rise of the soul. And for me, they have that power when I listen to them, and I've performed them a lot as well. And to perform them within a viol consort is an amazingly powerful experience.
What have we not talked about that you want to talk about, Angela?
I don't know. We seem to have covered a huge amount of ground.
Well, let's just let Arvo Pärt decide our next.
Yes, let's. Arvo Pärt. So he's a composer, one of the very few contemporary or near contemporary composers who really speaks to me. His music is very, very spiritual, and he developed a style which he called holy minimalism, which is a kind of very pure, very simple harmonic style, I guess you'd say, where he emphasizes the perfect harmonies. This particular piece, he uses a technique he calls tintinnabulation, which means bells, which is like a reduction of harmony and melody to what is absolutely essential. And through it, he creates a kind of shimmering landscape and again evokes this almost unbearable sense of longing of the soul for this purity and stillness. And the piece I've chosen is a piece called Silentium from Tabula Rasa of 1977. So it's called Silence. And the whole piece is actually a musical evocation of silence in some extraordinary magical way. And it just takes you to a place which is, again, a connection of heaven and earth, because he moves from the deepest possible, almost inaudible, deep sounds to the highest possible, again, almost inaudible sounds, and everything in between, while still retaining a sense of complete silence.
What do you think of John Cage and his evocations of silence?
Well, I haven't listened to a lot of John Cage, but I'm very wary of a lot of what I would call over-intellectualism in 20th century music and sort of gimmicky kind of stuff. Stockhausen, John Cage doesn't do much for me, I'm afraid. It doesn't touch my soul.
All right, let's hear some Arvo Pärt then. Some real silence. Now, for your last piece, we return to Monteverdi.
Yes, I have to ask for the indulgence of having two pieces of Monteverdi, because I just really wanted to bring in the other side of Monteverdi as opposed to his spiritual side in the Vespers. I wanted to end with one of his madrigals, and this is a madrigal from his seventh book of madrigals of 1619. And, well, what can I say about it? I mean, in terms of this marriage of words and music, this little piece probably is one of the most superb examples of both playfulness and very sort of deep erotic arousal in a way. And if you look at the words, well, I'll read the words. With what softness, O scented lips, I both kiss you and hear you speak. But if I enjoy one pleasure, the other is taken from me. Why do your delights kill each other when my soul lives so sweetly for both of them? What sensuous harmony you make! O dear kisses, O sweet words! If only you were able to unite both your sweetnesses, words kissing and kisses speaking. And I just love that text, because here we have the Mercury and Venus, here we have the kisses and the words. And he's saying in this song that in real life, as it were, you can't speak and kiss at the same time. In other words, you can't bring Mercury and Venus together. But of course, in music and song, you can, because with the music and the words, you are bringing them together completely. So what he's actually doing in this piece of music is uniting words and kisses through the music, although he's saying it's impossible to do so. And I just love that about it, and the way he takes two little different motifs, one for words, one for kisses, and sort of weaves them together, and then on the words sensuous harmony creates the most amazingly kind of rich and sensuous, sort of harmonious kind of environment for these words, and then plays again with the kisses in the words. So it's both playful and deep and erotic and also very spiritual, and brings this united sense together of words and music, of heart and mind, the two parts of ourselves. I mean, the metaphor can go on, and he just does it in this beautiful little piece.
Claudio Monteverdi, Con che suavità, with what sweetness, what softness, from the 7th book of Madrigals, 1619, and this version is by L'Arpeggiata. Now, Angela Voss, how do you think you will cope on the esoteric island?
Not very well. If I was totally on my own, I'd have to say I'm definitely not a loner. I definitely need to be surrounded by people. So I think the aloneness of it will be very challenging. However, I think I'd probably try and treat it as a kind of holiday interlude rather than a sort of something forever and ever. And
I'm afraid it's forever and ever. It's
Pardon?
forever and ever in as far as the human life goes, although if you want to consider moving beyond this.
Yes, that's true. So, yeah, I'm not sure. But I think if I've got all this music to listen to, then that obviously will be wonderful. But, yeah, the aloneness of it, I think I would definitely find challenging.
Well, you're about to be cast away on the Esoteric
Oh,
Island.
no.
And not only will you have the discs you've selected, but we're going to give you a copy of the Corpus Hermeticum and the complete works of John Dee. And
Oh, wonderful.
you may
Okay.
take a book of your own choice as well. So what would that book be?
Well, that would have to be Ficino's 3 books on life, because I keep going back there, and I've kept going back there for years and years and years, and finding more and more gems of wisdom, particularly within the third part about fitting one's life to the heavens. So if I take that with me and my ephemeris, it will help me work astrologically day by day.
I don't know if the ephemeris is going to be allowed. I think you might have to just...
Oh,
you,
okay.
You get one book and that's it.
Just one book. Well, then it was definitely Ficino's 3 books on life.
De triplici vita comparanda, it's yours. Now, you may also have a luxury to make life a little more comfortable. What would you like that to
Well,
be?
that would have to be a jacuzzi bath.
A jacuzzi. Okay. So you can
So
get,
that I can
get
relax in the bubbles.
right on. And presumably on this desert island, you also have the sea, so you can then have like a nice refreshing dip in the ocean afterwards.
That's right. Yes, I can. Yes, I'll have the advantage of the sea and of the bubbles. But I just love being immersed in water, and also, at the moment I've got quite bad tinnitus, and just hearing water and hearing the sound of bubbles and water flowing and waterfalls and being immersed in it is just bliss. So yes, a jacuzzi bath.
All right. Well, hopefully the time you spend on this esoteric island will have the knock-on benefit of curing your tinnitus, because it will be so quiet there, and the only really loud sounds
Yes.
you'll be hearing are these beautifully chosen bits of music,
And there'll be no technology, which will be lovely. Yeah.
except the magic record player that plays all these discs for you.
Yes, that's true.
I like to
yes,
think of it
something will
as
have to play them.
as an island, something like the island in Shakespeare's Tempest. So there's these sort of daimonic presences who can do things like play records for you.
Oh,
right?
yes. Well, the daimonic presences would be great, because then they'd stop me from being lonely.
Unfortunately, we have to ask you, if you could choose just one disc to save from the waves, from the 8 tracks you've chosen,
Yes.
which one would it be?
I think it would have to be Monteverdi's Duo Seraphim. I think it would have to be that piece because of everything I've already said about it. It just transports me to another place, and I could just listen to it for hours.
Well, Angela Voss, thank you very much for sharing with us your esoteric island discs, and stay esoteric.
Thank you. It's been great fun.